Welcome to Treasure Island, the classic novel by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Chapter 23, Pieces of 8. Owing to the cant of the vessel, the masts hung far out over the water, and from my perch on the cross-trees, I had nothing below me but the surface of the bay. Hans, who was not so far up, was in consequence nearer to the ship, and fell between me and the bulwarks. He rose once to the surface in a lather of foam and blood, and then sank again for good. As the water settled, I could see him lying huddled together on the clean, bright sand in the shadow of the vessel's sides. A fish or two whipped past his body. Sometimes, by the quivering of the water, he appeared to move a little, as if he were trying to rise. But he was dead enough, for all that, being both shot and drowned. The hot blood was running over my back and chest. The dirk, where it had pinned my shoulder to the mast, seemed to burn like a hot iron. Yet it was not so much these real sufferings that distressed me. It was the horror I had upon my mind of falling from the crosstrees into that still green water beside the body of the coxswain. Gradually, I calmed down and regained control. My first thought was to pull out the dirk, or either it was stuck too hard, or I lost my nerve. I shuddered violently, and that did the trick. The knife had barely pierced me, held only by a pinch of skin, and the shudder tore it free. The blood ran down the faster, to be sure, but I was my own master again, and only tacked to the mast by my coat and shirt. These last I broke through with a sudden jerk, and then regained the deck by the starboard shrouds. Then I looked around me, and as the ship was now, in a sense, my own, I began to think of clearing it from its last passenger, the dead man O'Brien. He had pitched, as I have said, against the bulwarks, where he lay like some horrible, ungainly sort of puppet. In that position I could easily have my way with him. I took him by the waist, as if he had been a sack of bran, and with one good heave tumbled him overboard. He went in with a sounding plunge, the red cap came off, and remained floating on the surface. As soon as the splash subsided, I could see him and Israel lying side by side, both wavering with the tremulous movement of the water. O'Brien, though still quite a young man, was very bald. There he lay, with that bald head across the knees of the man who had killed him, and the quick fishes steering to and fro over both. The tide had just turned. The sun was within so few degrees of setting that already the shadow of the pines upon the western shore began to reach right across the anchorage and fall in patterns on the deck. I began to see danger to the ship. I quickly doused the jibs and brought them down, but the mainsail posed more trouble. With the schooner tilted, the boom had swung outward, and part of the sail dipped under water, making things riskier. The strain was great, and I hesitated to interfere. At last, I used my knife to cut the halyards. The peak dropped instantly, a great belly of loose canvas floated broad upon the water, and since, pull as I liked, I could not budge the downhaul, that was the extent of what I could accomplish. For the rest, the Hispaniola must trust to luck, like myself. By now the anchorage was in shadow, the last light flickering through the trees and glinting on the wreck's flowers. It turned chilly, the tide dropped fast, the schooner leaning further. I moved forward, saw it was shallow, and holding the cut rope, slipped overboard. The water barely reached my waist, the sand was firm, ridged. I waded ashore happily, leaving the Hispaniola tilted, her sails spread across the bay. Just then the sun fully set, and the breeze whispered through the swaying pines.
At least and at last I was off the sea, nor had I returned thence empty-handed. There lay the schooner, clear at last from buccaneers and ready for our own men to board and get to sea again. I had nothing nearer my fancy than to get home to the stockade and boast of my achievements. Possibly I might be blamed a bit for my truantry, but the recapture of the Hispaniola was a clenching answer, and I hoped that even Captain Smollett would confess I had not lost my time. So, in high spirits, I headed for the blockhouse. I recalled that the easternmost river flowed from the two-peaked hill on my left, so I turned that way to cross the stream while it was still shallow. The woods were fairly open, and following the lower slopes, I soon rounded the hill and waded mid-calf across the stream. I was now near where I'd first met Ben Gunn. I moved carefully, watching all around. Dusk had almost fallen. As I passed between the two peaks, I noticed a flickering light in the sky, likely the island man cooking over a fire. Still, I wondered why he was so careless. For if I could see this radiance, might it not reach the eyes of Silver himself, where he camped upon the shore among the marshes? The night grew darker, and I could barely find my way. The double hill and spyglass faded from view, the stars were dim, and I kept stumbling through bushes and sandy pits. Suddenly, a kind of brightness fell about me. I looked up and saw moonlight on the spyglass, then a broad silvery glow rising behind the trees. The moon had come up. With its light, I quickly covered the rest of the way, walking and sometimes running, eager to reach the stockade. As I neared the stockade, I slowed down and moved carefully. I didn't want to be misunderstood and shot by my own people. The moon was climbing higher and higher. Its light began to fall here and there in masses through the more open districts of the wood, and right in front of me a glow of a different color appeared among the trees. It was red and hot, and now and again it was a little darkened, as it were the embers of a bonfire smoldering. I reached the edge of the clearing. Moonlight bathed the western end, while the blockhouse remained in shadow, streaked with silver. A large fire had burned to glowing embers, casting a red light beside the moon's pale glow. All was silent, except for the breeze. I stopped with much wonder in my heart, and perhaps a little terror also. It had not been our way to build great fires. We were, indeed, by the captain's orders, somewhat niggardly of firewood, and I began to fear that something had gone wrong while I was absent. I crept around the eastern end, staying in the shadows, and crossed the palisade where it was darkest. To be sure, I dropped to my hands and knees and crawled silently to the house corner. As I got closer, relief washed over me. The sound of my friend's snoring, though not pleasant, was at that moment music to my ears. In the meantime, there was no doubt of one thing. They kept an infamous bad watch. If it had been Silver and his lads that were now creeping in on them, not a soul would have seen daybreak. That was what it was, thought I, to have the captain wounded, and again I blamed myself sharply for leaving them in that danger with so few to mount guard.
By this time, I had got to the door and stood up. All was dark within, so that I could distinguish nothing by the eye. With my arms before me, I walked steadily in. I should lie down in my own place, I thought with a silent chuckle, and enjoy their faces when they found me in the morning. My foot struck something yielding. It was a sleeper's leg, and he turned and groaned, but without awaking. And then, all of a sudden, a shrill voice broke forth out of the darkness. "Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!" Silver's green parrot, Captain Flint. It was she whom I had heard pecking at a piece of bark. It was she, keeping better watch than any human being, who thus announced my arrival with her wearisome refrain. I had no time left me to recover. At the sharp, clipping tone of the parrot, the sleepers awoke and sprang up, and with a mighty oath, the voice of Silver cried, "Who goes?" I turned to run, struck violently against one person, recoiled, and ran full into the arms of a second, who for his part closed upon and held me tight. "Bring a torch, Dick," said Silver, when my capture was thus assured. And one of the men left the log house and presently returned with a lighted brand.